The city was a restless beast that October, its nights thick with a heat that clung to your skin like a whispered sin. I'm Lauren, and this isn't my story, not really. I'm just the one who saw it unfold, the one who couldn't look away when the shadows grew heavy with forbidden desire. It was my friend Chloe and her husband's coworker Ethan. A man with a voice like gravel and eyes that burned with a hunger you could feel across a room. Chloe was the spark, and he was the fire that consumed her. Chloe was 29, all soft curves and quiet rebellion, with a laugh that could unravel a man's restraint and a body that made you notice. She'd been married to Mark for 6 years, a man who loved her, but whose steady presence left her restless, yearning for something she couldn't name. Ethan was Mark's co-worker, 32, tall and lean, with hands that moved with a purpose that made your pulse quicken. I saw it the first time I visited their house for a company barbecue, the way the air shifted when Ethan walked into the backyard, his eyes finding Chloe's like a magnet finding north. I was there one evening, stopping by to drop off a recipe Chloe had asked for. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that hums with secrets, the windows open to let in the faint autumn breeze. Chloe answered the door, her dress loose and clinging to her hips, her hair spilling over her shoulders like dark silk. "Lauren, you're a lifesaver," she said, her voice light, but her eyes restless, darting toward the living room. Ethan was there, leaning against the fireplace, a beer in his hand, his shirt unbuttoned just enough to show the shadow of his chest. He smiled at me, slow and deliberate, but it wasn't me he was after. We sat in the living room, the three of us, the city's pulse faint through the open windows, the lamplight casting soft shadows across the room. Chloe curled up on the couch, her legs tucked under her, the hem of her dress riding high on her thigh. Ethan's eyes followed, lingering on the curve of her knee, the soft skin glowing in the warm light. I felt it then, the undercurrent sharp and electric like a wire sparking in the dark. They weren't talking much, but their silence was loud, heavy with things that shouldn't be said. I should have left, but I didn't. I stayed, caught in the pull of something forbidden. Chloe laughed at something Ethan said, her head tilting back, her throat exposed. His gaze was fixed, unblinking, like a man staring at his own downfall. "Your trouble, you know that," he said, his voice low, teasing but edged with something darker. She met his eyes, her lips parting just enough to let the moment hang. "Maybe I like trouble," she said, her voice a soft challenge, her eyes locked on his. The air shifted, grew thicker, like the moment before a spark catches fire. I shifted in my seat, my skin prickling. I wasn't supposed to see this, but I couldn't stop watching. The beer bottles emptied and the room grew warmer, the air thick with tension. Chloe's dress slipped off one shoulder, revealing a hint of lace, and she didn't fix it. Ethan's voice grew softer, his words more deliberate, each one landing like a touch. "You're different tonight," he said, leaning forward, his elbows on his knees. "Like you're waiting for something." Chloe's smile was slow, almost dangerous. "Maybe I am," she said, her voice a low hum, her eyes never leaving his. I felt like an intruder, but my feet wouldn't move. The night outside pulsed, but it couldn't drown out the beat of my heart. Then it happened. Chloe stood, stretching her dress, riding up to show a sliver of her waist, the curve of her hip. She crossed the room to get another beer, her movements slow, deliberate, like she knew he was watching. Ethan's eyes followed, his jaw tight, his hands flexing. When she passed him, her hand brushed his arm, accidental or maybe not. His fingers caught hers just for a second, and I saw it, the spark, the flare of something forbidden. She didn't pull away. She stood there, her breath shallow, her eyes searching his face. "Careful, Chloe," he murmured so low I barely heard it. This is a dangerous game. She didn't answer, just let her fingers linger in his before slipping free. My heart was pounding now, my mouth dry. I knew I should say something break the spell, but I didn't. I was trapped a witness to something I couldn't unsee. Chloe sat back down closer to him, now her knee brushing his. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in the air, thick with want. I mumbled some excuse about a call and stood to leave, but their eyes were on each other, not me. As I reached the door, I glanced back. Ethan's hand was on her wrist, his thumb tracing slow circles. She wasn't stopping him. I stepped outside, the autumn air cool against my skin, but it couldn't wash away what I'd seen. Chloe so reckless, so alive in her desire. Ethan, a man who knew exactly what he was doing, and me, the fool who saw it all and did nothing. I walked to my car, the city's lights blurring, but I couldn't shake the image of her wrist in his hand, the way her eyes burned when she looked at him. I knew it wasn't over. It was just beginning. Days later, I saw Chloe at a cafe, her fingers wrapped around a coffee mug, her eyes distant like she was chasing a memory she couldn't catch. She looked different, sharper, like a woman who'd tasted something forbidden and couldn't forget the flavor. I sat across from her, my heart heavy with what I'd seen. I wanted to ask about Ethan, about that night, about the way his touch lingered on her skin, but the words wouldn't come. She didn't bring it up either, just smiled, that half smile of hers, the one that hid more than it showed. "You okay?" I asked, my voice too careful. She shrugged, her blouse slipping down her shoulder, revealing a faint mark, a shadow maybe, or something else. "Just restless," she said, her voice low, like she was confessing to the coffee instead of me. "The house, it's too quiet sometimes, too heavy." I knew she wasn't talking about the house. She was talking about him, Ethan. The way he filled every room, every silence with that slow burning intensity of his. I didn't push her. I couldn't. But I saw it in her eyes. The hunger, the guilt, the thrill of crossing a line she couldn't uncross. She leaned forward, her perfume sharp and sweet, and said, "You ever feel like you're falling into something you can't stop?" I nodded, though I didn't know what she meant. Not really. But I'd seen it that night, the way her body leaned toward his, the way her breath caught when his fingers grazed her wrist. It wasn't just desire. It was something deeper, something that clawed at you until you bled. That evening, I went back to their house. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted to see if the air still crackled, if the fireplace still held their secrets. Chloe was in the kitchen pouring wine, her dress thin enough to show the outline of her body. Ethan was there too, leaning against the counter, his eyes on her like she was the only thing in the world. Mark was upstairs, probably asleep, oblivious to the storm brewing below. I stood in the hallway, hidden in the shadows, my pulse loud in my ears. "Chloe." He called, his voice low, rough, like he'd been holding it in too long. She turned, her hair catching the lamplight, and walked toward him too close. Her hand brushed his arm as she handed him a glass, and I saw it again, the spark, the heat, the way her fingers lingered just a second too long. He didn't move away. Instead, he looked at her, his eyes dark, unreadable, like a man staring at his own ruin. "You're making this hard," he said. But his voice was weak, like he was begging her to prove him wrong. She didn't answer, just tilted her head, her lips parting slightly. The air between them was alive, pulsing like the moment before a kiss you know you shouldn't take. I wanted to shout to break the spell, but my voice was gone, swallowed by the weight of what I was seeing. Chloe stepped closer, her bare foot brushing his, her dress swaying against her hips. "What if I don't want to stop?" she whispered, so soft I barely heard it. His hand twitched like he was fighting himself, but then it was on her waist, his fingers digging into the fabric, pulling her closer. The world seemed to slow, the lamplight wrapping them in a haze of gold and shadow. His thumb traced the curve of her hip, slow, deliberate, like he was memorizing her. She didn't pull away. Her breath was shallow, her chest rising and falling too fast. I could see it, the want, the need, the way it consumed them both. It was wrong, so wrong, but it was alive, burning brighter than anything I'd ever seen. I turned away, my face hot, my heart racing. I shouldn't have stayed, but I did, caught in the pull of their sin. When I looked back, they were closer, her hand on his chest, his fingers tangled in her hair. The air was thick with their heat, their guilt, their hunger. "Chloe," he said again, his voice a low growl like a man drowning. She didn't answer, just leaned into him, her lips brushing his jaw so soft it was barely a touch. But it was enough. Enough to shatter the last thread of restraint. His hand slid lower, pulling her against him, his fingers tugging gently at her hair, and I saw the way her body melted into his, the way her eyes closed like she was surrendering to something bigger than herself. The kitchen was a haze of shadows and lamplight, their bodies pressed together in a rhythm that was both beautiful and wrong. Her breath was ragged, her hands clutching at his shoulders, her eyes half open, burning with a mix of guilt and need. His touch was relentless, his fingers gripping her hair, guiding her closer, his lips brushing her neck, her ear, her lips. She gasped, her body arching into his, her dress riding higher, exposing the soft curve of her thigh. It was raw, desperate, a dance of desire that left no room for reason. I felt the heat of it, the shame of it, the thrill of it like a pulse in my own veins. They were lost in each other, consumed by the fire they'd lit, and I was the witness, the one who saw it all and did nothing. I left then, my steps unsteady, the night pressing against me like a weight. I didn't want to see what came next, but I knew. I knew the way their bodies would move, the way their breaths would tangle, the way the night would swallow their sin. Chloe, so reckless, so alive in her desire. Ethan, a man who'd crossed a line he couldn't uncross. And me, the witness, the one who saw it all and did nothing. The house loomed behind me, its windows dark, its secrets darker. The weeks that followed were a blur of whispers and glances, each one heavier than the last. Chloe didn't talk about it, but she didn't have to. It was written all over her in the way her eyes lingered on the empty spaces where Ethan had been, in the way her fingers trembled when she poured her coffee. I saw her less, but when I did, she was a shadow of herself caught between the thrill of what she'd done and the guilt that clawed at her soul. Ethan was no better. I caught him once outside the office, his face tight, his eyes haunted like a man who'd tasted paradise and knew he'd burn for it. Mark was around more, his presence, a stark contrast to the fire that had raged in his absence. Chloe and Ethan moved around him like ghosts, their touches careful, their smiles forced. But I saw it the way their eyes met across the room, the way their fingers brushed when they passed each other like they couldn't help themselves. It was a secret too big to hold, a fire too hot to contain. I wanted to tell Mark to shatter the lie, but I didn't. I was complicit, bound by what I'd seen, what I hadn't stopped. One night, I went back to the house uninvited. The air was thick with the scent of fallen leaves, the moon low and heavy, casting shadows that danced like lovers. Chloe was in the backyard, her dress white and sheer, clinging to her like a second skin. Ethan was there too, his shirt open, his chest rising and falling too fast. They didn't see me, didn't know I was there hidden in the shadows of the porch. The air between them was alive, pulsing with the same heat I'd felt that first night. But now it was sharper, more desperate, like they knew the end was coming. "Chloe," he said, his voice low, raw, like a man pleading for salvation. She turned to him, her eyes wide, her lips parted, and I saw the war in her, the want, the shame, the need that burned hotter than both. "We can't keep doing this," he said, but his hand was already on her, his fingers tracing the curve of her neck, sliding down to her shoulder. She shivered, her body leaning into his touch, her breath shallow. "Then, why don't you stop?" She whispered, her voice a challenge, a dare. He didn't answer, just pulled her closer, his hands gripping her waist, his lips brushing her throat. She gasped, her fingers tangling in his hair, her body arching against his. The moonlight painted them in silver, their shadows merging into one. It was beautiful and terrible, a dance of desire and destruction. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. I was trapped, a witness to their sin, their surrender. His hand slid lower, pulling her dress up, exposing the curve of her thigh, the soft skin glowing in the moonlight. Her breath was ragged, her moans soft and desperate, like she was drowning in him. The night seemed to hold its breath, the world narrowing to the two of them, their bodies pressed together, their desire a living thing. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice breaking, and he answered with a kiss deep and hungry, like he was trying to consume her. I saw the way her body responded, the way her hands clutched at him, the way her eyes closed as if she could block out the world. But the world was there, waiting, ready to judge. I left before it went further, my steps silent, my heart pounding. I didn't want to see the end, but I knew it was coming. Chloe and Ethan caught in a web they'd spun themselves, bound by desire and doomed by it. The house loomed behind me, its windows dark, its secrets heavier than ever. I drove away, the night swallowing me, but I couldn't escape the image of them, their bodies tangled, their breaths mingling, their sin burning brighter than the moon. So here I am telling you this story, my voice shaking with the weight of it. I saw it all and I did nothing. Maybe that's my sin too. If this hit you hard, if it stirred something and you hit that like button, share it with someone who gets it and subscribe for more stories that cut deep. Leave a comment. Tell me what you'd have done, or don't just let it simmer. Check out the next video because trust me, the shadows have more to say. Until then, keep watching, keep feeling, and don't look away.